I quit. This is too hard. Oh, hi. Today I want to talk to you about quitters die. I had two grandfathers. One of them retired and in his middle to late age, and in his retiring years he spent a lot of his time just watching TV, sitting around doing almost nothing. My other grandfather, he worked till he was 80 at a lumber yard, and he quit after he had broken his back and broken his arm, and the owner of the lumber yard considered him too much of a liability, so he finally applied for disability pay. But he always told us grandkids that it was quitting to retire, and he wasn't going to retire and sit down and watch TV and die. The Church of Galatians was having problems with quitting. They had started out their salvation with belief in Jesus Christ, and then they were turning back to the law. Chapter 3, verse 1, Paul tells them, "O foolish Galatians, who hath bewitched you, that ye should not obey the truth, before whose eyes Jesus Christ hath been evidently set forth crucified among you?" And then verse 3, he says, "Are ye so foolish? Having begun in the Spirit, are ye now made perfect by the flesh?" And he reminds them what they had learned in the beginning. In verse 13, "Christ hath redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us. For it is written, Cursed is everyone that hangeth on a tree." They were turning away from Christ and turning back to the law because false prophets had snuck in and had begun to tell them, no, you have to keep the law. This is very important. Galatians chapter 4 and verse 9, he says, "But now, after that ye have known God, or rather are known of God, how turn ye again to the weak and beggarly elements, whereunto ye desire again to be in bondage?" The Galatians were turning from walking in the Spirit to walking in the flesh, turning back to the fleshly way of earning salvation that doesn't work. In chapter 5, verse 1, he says, "Stand fast therefore in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage." In verse 7, he says, "Ye did run well. Who did hinder you, that ye should not obey the truth? This persuasion cometh not of him that calleth you. A little leaven leaveneth the whole lump." He's trying to help them see you started well, and you've turned aside from the way. You've stepped out of the way. You've quit. And a little bit will take you there. It's just little compromises that take you off the path. The good news is in verse 10, he says, "I have confidence in you through the Lord, that ye will be none otherwise minded. But he that troubleth you shall bear his judgment, whosoever he be." God will judge those who cause others to quit, and who turn other people out of the way of righteousness. The second half of the chapter 5 of Galatians, starting in verse 16, Paul begins to emphasize walking in the Spirit. He's giving the Galatians the solution to quitting. He's giving them the solution to getting back on the right path of service for the Lord. So I'm not going to read it because it's about 10 verses, but take the time and read it. This is where we get the fruits of the Spirit. We also get the list of the fruits of the flesh. And God explains to us that this is where we walk in the Spirit, and if we do that, we shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. That's verse 16. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 9, Paul tells them, "Let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap, if we faint not." A couple of biblical examples. There's Peter. He was serving the Lord well, and then in that time of crisis, as Christ was being tried before Pilate, Peter denied his Lord 3 times. He quit. He turned back. And if we follow him through the scriptures, we see that afterward he left the judgment hall, and then his life begins to kind of disintegrate. He begins to just go back to all his old ways. And he says, "Let's just go back to fishing, boys. I don't know what hope there is." That's when Jesus came for him and pulled him back to the way of righteousness. But Peter had quit, and he was on his way to dying spiritually in his walk with the Lord. Elijah, he told the Lord, "I quit. They're out to kill all the prophets of the Lord. I quit." And God said, "Okay then, I'll call someone else to take your place." And he did. He replaced him with Elisha. Quitters die. They no longer have the impetus to go forward. So what's the solution? Don't quit, obviously. I wish it was that easy. The solution is to walk in the Spirit. As I mentioned, the second half of Galatians chapter 5, Paul gives the Galatians clear instructions on walking in the Spirit. Ephesians chapter 6, he gives them instructions to stand strong by putting on the armor of God. Many of you have that passage memorized. Ephesians 6:10 through 18. But through that passage he says, stand, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. He says, be strong in the Lord. And he also says that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, having done all to stand. Stand therefore. God wants us to stand strong in the faith, not quitting. And we do that by wearing our spiritual armor, defeating the devil, and choosing to walk in the Spirit. I want to just close with a quick example. There were 2 Marines on an island in the Pacific Ocean battling the Japanese. And the Japanese surprised them and their platoon in an ambush. One of these 2 Marines were the 2 survivors from their group. One of them was injured. The other managed to be hidden in a foxhole and wasn't spotted by the Japanese. The injured man was lying in a bush, also hidden, so the Japanese didn't see him when they came back through and made sure everybody was dead. This happened in the night. These 2 men, who were still alive, had to lay there very quietly and wait all day long, lest the Japanese find them. They were in occupied territory. All day long, no water, no food, no movement, until the night fell. And when the night fell, they were able to crawl away. They had to crawl across the island back to where their camps were and where their fellow soldiers were for safety. In that process, they were deprived of water, deprived of food. They were deprived of medical care. The injured man became delirious as he lost blood, as infection set in, and yet those men stuck to it. They were risking their lives, but to quit was death. Because quitters die. They stuck to the task and they survived. Remember that. Remember that it's hard sometimes to walk for the Lord, but walk in the Spirit. Don't quit, because quitters die.